Welcome to a bit of an unusual format for the breakdown. Normally we go through a series of topics to try to keep people caught up with what's been going on in Alberta politics. But we're not going to do that today. We will be getting back to that format right away. In fact, we have 2 episodes planned that are going to be massive because we do have to talk about the charter violating Bill 1, the letter from Adriana LaGrange demanding UCP MLAs be invited to high school grads and accommodated, the forced death of Energy Efficiency Alberta, the massive cuts to the Edmonton education system, UCP MLA Devinder Tour intimidating small business owners in Calgary, the killing of the job creation for a new health advocate by Tyler Shandros so he could appoint the ex-UCP executive director who has no experience in health or healthcare, and the termination of a video safe consumption app that could have saved the lives of countless Albertans, especially in rural Alberta. It's a lot. And we will get into all of that at length, but today we're just going to focus on one thing. It's Pride Month. And this provincial government has been extremely hostile to the LGBTQ2S+ community. Whether it's rolling back protections for LGBTQ2S+ youth, or the token hanging of a pride flag for Pride Month that was only attended by a couple of UCP MLAs and for which the pride flag was kept up for less than a day during Pride Month. A Pride Month which has also had both its protests and its celebrations somewhat muted by the presence of COVID-19. So we've decided to dedicate this entire episode to an interview we did with a member of the LGBTQ2S+ community and local drag king, Shane Onyou. It's a bit longer than a normal episode, and the audio does get a little squirrely towards the end, but Shane does an amazing job of providing some context, clearing up some misconceptions, as well as providing a glimpse into what it's like to be a member of the LGBTQ2S+ community in Alberta right now. It's well worth the time. So without further ado, here's our interview with Shane Onyou. Welcome to another episode of The Breakdown, where we're doing another interview segment. This month is Pride Month, and Pride Month this year is a little bit muted, obviously, because of COVID-19, but we still wanted to do our bit on the show to try to celebrate it as best we can. So we're here in sunny, thank goodness, downtown Calgary, and we're speaking with Shane Onyou today.
Absolutely.
So Shane, thank you so much for joining us.
No, thank you for having me.
So to start with, can you sort of give us an introduction for who you are?
Absolutely, absolutely. In the community here in Calgary, I am known as Shane Onyou, the drag king, performer, as well as activist. I've performed for protests as well, and I do reading at the libraries too, so that's a little bit about what I do here. I'm also a 47-year-old lesbian, so I'm closer to 50 than I am to 40, so I've got a little bit of life experience on both sides of the fence. Growing up in the 80s was a lot different than what's going on now, so I was very honored that you asked me here today. So.
Oh, well, thank you so much for being willing to talk about this stuff. Let's have the conversation in the context of not knowing anything about any of the terms that
Absolutely.
we're using. Okay, so to start with, what is a drag king?
Well, many people have heard of drag queens, and it's actually just the opposite. It's just somebody who prefers to perform male presenting.
Okay.
Is basically what it is. It's not necessarily a female dressing up as a male, although that's kind of basically where the terminology started, right?
Okay.
So drag king was a female dressing up as a male, as opposed to a male dressing up as a female, which is a drag queen. Now there's a lot more. There's everything in between. There's not just drag queens and drag kings. There's also monarchs. And monarchs are something right in between. And they basically, some days will present femme, some days male, some days their performance will have a little bit of everything right in it. So
Okay.
it's on that gender spectrum.
Okay.
So.
What's the difference between a drag king or a drag queen or a monarch, which is a new one to me, and somebody who identifies as trans?
Well, for me, I don't identify as trans. I do this strictly because it's a performance thing for me. It's an art. It's a way to convey a message that I couldn't in the past. Whereas trans is actually how they feel. They might have been born differently than how they feel. So they feel more masc than the feminine body they were born with. So that's the difference. They're not doing it for an art. They're doing it because that's how they feel. That's how they feel inside. And if anybody were to tell me any different, hit my mic, I would be upset, like, why can you not have that trans feeling, right? I don't have to experience that, but that's the difference between the two. Is I am doing an art and performing, and that's what it is to me, because I enjoy dressing up this way. But they, as a community, trans they'll dress the way they identify.
Okay.
So that's or present.
Okay.
Not even necessarily dress, present.
And it's not, those two things aren't necessarily mutually exclusive either. So you can have somebody who identifies as trans who also performs as
Absolutely.
a drag king or queen.
Absolutely.
Okay.
We very much do, but that doesn't necessarily mean that all drag performers are trans. So yes,
Okay.
we do have some that like to perform, and some of them will perform opposite of what their body presents normally. And like I said, some will perform both. Right?
Okay.
They'll do both.
So there's an important delineation to be
Yes.
made then between somebody who identifies as trans and somebody who performs
Yes.
as a drag king, queen,
Yes.
or monarch.
Absolutely.
Okay, good. So the next piece that I'd kind of like to get into is, as much as you're comfortable, sort of where are you from and how did you get into performing as a drag king?
Okay. How far back from do you want to know?
As comfortable as you are.
Well, I was born on the East Coast, but we, of course, back then when I was born in the 70s, a lot of people were moving west for oil reasons, right? And my father was one of those. So I don't begrudge oil at all. I do think we need to move away from it, but that's another story. But I don't begrudge it. So, we came out here for that reason. So I was raised in Fort McMurray.
Okay.
So I lived there till I was 27. And a lot of my developmental adolescent years were there. So that's kind of where a lot of my fears and stuff stemmed, because it was kind of a isolated community at that time. It's not the size it is now. There's still issues up there and all that. But so, I was very much in the closet. I never was out up there. It wasn't until I moved down to Calgary and had a broader prospect on life, more people, a bigger community to relate to, and a visible community, right? So that's kind of where I came from in that respect. But I don't live right in Calgary. I live in Okotoks.
Okay.
So that presents its own challenges. I'm not going to lie. I'm on the Okotoks Pride Committee. I'm a stage coordinator out there, and things are on hold right now. But, over the last probably 3 or 4 years, with me being more out, louder, I would say, more visible, I have actually had death threats. And, I know it's hard to believe, but...
Unfortunately, it's not.
Okay, good. Because somebody, I had mentioned that the other day because they were attacking a friend of mine who is non-binary, which that means they don't, well, you probably know, but maybe for our viewers,
Yeah.
that means they don't identify with the body they were born in. So
Okay.
it's kind of another trans term, right? I was talking to one of they were being attacked. So I came in and I said, they were calling them saying that you're not telling the truth and blah, blah, blah. And so I came on and I had mentioned that this is the truth. I've had slurs yelled at me. I've had death threats and how dare you not say this doesn't happen? And they just said, I call BS. So people still don't believe it happens. And by saying you call BS, or even staying silent, that is more deadly than anything else. I'd rather you not say anything and do something than just berate and not do anything. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like those things. So that's kind of where I come from. I do have a lot of anger, but I say I'm a little older, so it's
I'm
nice.
punk rock, so I got lots of anger too.
Right? And it's mostly because of I come from the 80s and everything was so hush hush then, right? And the old AIDS epidemic and all that stuff. So I do have a strong, loud voice now, but I didn't always. So it does come out angry at times, and I think that comes across at times.
What's your sense? What would you say? I'll start with that. Are there differences, do you think, for somebody growing up LGBTQ2S plus now versus what you had to go through?
Hands down. I'm not saying it's easy, but I will say there's a lot more. It's a lot more out there.
Okay.
It's not so hidden. Another thing that I found is a beautiful thing, is the terminologies that they have. And a lot of people don't like labels. I'm not one of those people, because when I was a child, I didn't have words for a lot of the things that I felt. I didn't have ways to tell people, to express, what was going on, because it wasn't talked about. It was hush, hush, hush. And even worse, when the AIDS epidemic happened, it was just like, how dare you, like I got beat up in grade 8 because someone thought I might be gay. I didn't even know if I was gay then, for sure, right? Like who gets to do that kind of thing? And that's not fair, like that kind of stuff. So that's,
Okay. The idea of labels segs really well into one of the other things that I wanted to touch on with you. It seems like a lot of the difficulty people have understanding the LGBTQ2S+ community. It comes from a place where, for somebody whose background or personal belief system is built entirely on a sort of a binary universe where men are men and women are women and that's what you do. A lot of the confusion comes from the fact that a lot of the evidence, scientific evidence, so this isn't even just hyperbolic stuff, but a lot of that clearly shows that human sexuality is much more of a spectrum than it is a thing that you can pigeonhole. And for somebody who's used to being able to say, well, this is that and this is this, learning about a spectrum is a difficult proposition. How do you find ways to bridge that in your experience?
Well, in my experience, and this goes back to like things that I've been learning over the last few years, my experience to bridge that is change is fearful. It's scary. But you know what? Change is beautiful, right? So educate yourself and get to know these things and try and learn the things that scare you most. They aren't so scary when you learn about them, or they can't be that scary when you have knowledge about them, right? Like that's my theory anyways. So I just say, like, educate yourself and don't be shy. And there was more I wanted to say to that question. Can you say, carry on?
So the big question is I think that there's a group of a segment of people who are very comfortable and open to the idea of maybe there's stuff that I don't know about this. But it seems like the biggest group that needs to experience the movement is the people who don't understand that there's a lot more to the spectrum than their perceptions to this point have established for them. So for the people who don't necessarily know there's something they need to learn, or the people who simply don't want to learn, how do you bridge that?
I don't spend a lot of time on people who don't want to learn.
Okay.
Honestly, unfortunately, when you've already put that word "don't" in there, I don't want to know, I never will believe this, or any of that stuff, they're already done. They've already shut down.
Okay.
I'm only going to start to broach that conversation with people who are open to it.
Okay.
I would never, and that's just from years, I don't like people pushing their stuff on me, and I don't want to push it I don't want to do that to other people too. I don't want to turn people off. That's not to say that if somebody's berating something about me or my community, that I'm not going to be verbal about it.
Okay.
Because, that's my battle, and I will try to educate them that way. But if they're not willing to learn, I don't have time to waste my time anymore, because there's enough people who do want to.
Okay.
Right? So
how do you find those people?
Overall, a lot of them are so willing to learn, and just like me, they make mistakes. Like these pronoun things, none of that existed when I was younger. None of it did. People, we talked about he and she, but this whole they, them, like none of that stuff existed. So that's a learning curve for me, and I make mistakes, and I'm in the community. So it's okay to make mistakes if you're trying. So that's what I tell people who are learning. I said, if you're not going to try, and you're going to make mistakes, and have a little thick skin about it, because you might get called out. But just think of it, they've been oppressed for a long time, so there is some anger. But learn. learn, and those things will happen less.
One of the things that I've consistently heard from people who aren't familiar with the community is that they're exactly what you said, afraid of making mistakes. How do you disarm that fear?
Well, and I can't. There's mean people out there everywhere, and sorry, they're in my community too. And some people will jump on you. I encourage you to keep trying, though.
Okay.
That's the best thing to do. Do not give up, because that's. And if you don't know, ask. I would rather be asked than assumed. Anything. Like I am such an open book. Like I even do a show where people just call me or message me and ask me questions, and I just answer them truthfully. And I encourage that, like to start conversations, because we can't bridge that gap, that middle space, if we don't start connecting that way and start talking about this stuff and making mistakes.
Okay.
And not being scared to make them.
So one of the other things that I wanted to touch on a little bit is some of the biggest misconceptions surrounding the LGBTQ2S+ community. So to start with, what are some of the biggest misconceptions that you've heard about your community?
That we're perverts, molesters, that it's not a far line from bestiality. Like, you wouldn't believe some of the things that have been said. Like, it's just... And I hate to say it, but white middle-class men are the worst. But they are the worst.
Yep.
And in that space, I feel the least safe. So, it does happen. But
where do you think those misconceptions come from?
Probably, everything from generational misconceptions. Those I find, like, with the older generation, the middle-class men and above, even women, too, older than that, right? I think a lot of it is generational, and then socialization, right? A lot of nature versus nurture, so
Okay.
where you're raised. There's a lot of contributing factors to where something like that can come from, but a lot of it is just the socialization, whether it's in the house or at school.
I feel compelled to mention at this point that, and I spent more than a couple of hours reading research papers on this leading up to this interview. There's literally no evidence whatsoever that anybody who's a member of the LGBTQ2S+ community has a higher predilection for any of those things that you just mentioned.
Good for you.
So I think that that's an important ingredient to be included in the conversation.
Absolutely.
Because it's not just a question of these are misconceptions, but there's actual raw data that says that's demonstrably wrong.
So I've got a question for you.
Yeah.
How do we get men like you to do something like you did?
If I knew the answer to that question,
Right?
I wish.
Right? It's that
I
gap.
think a large part of it is, okay, so I'll be the interviewed one for a sec. I think a large part of it stems back to the whole idea of toxic masculinity, which I think is a very real thing.
It is, absolutely.
I read a thing a while ago that the reason why straight men are so terrified and have so many preconceived notions about LGBTQ2S+ community is because they're afraid that they're going to be treated like they treat women. And I think that there's a lot. It does. It absolutely does. And I think that there's a lot of validity to that. But when you see one of the biggest things that I've heard when I've been hanging out with people is when there's members of the community around is that, oh, what am I going to do if they hit on me? And to be clear, I think that
I've heard it before too.
That's probably one of the most vain things that you can say.
It is. And then the other thing, what's a great response to that? Is, dude, take it as a compliment.
Well, that's exactly
it.
Thank you. That's exactly it.
Right.
But I think that that nervousness and that fear. I mean, I've certainly been hit on by members of the community, happily married, but I don't take it as an affront. I go, oh, thank you very much, but married. And that's the end of the conversation for me. But I think that there's a lot of, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do this segment, is because I think that there's a whole lot of insecurity in the white straight male community. And I think that's where a lot of that comes from, because if I'm afraid of it and I just choose to make it an enemy, well, now I can understand it, because now it's just an enemy.
Well, it's easier to stay ignorant.
Yeah.
It is. And
Yeah.
I'm not going to lie. I did it for a long time, right? Like, I've only been reactive in the community for the last 5 years. So, I get it. It's a scary thing, but I encourage people to look inside and challenge those scary feelings, right? To me, that's what it's about. Like, if you're not learning and growing every day, what are you doing, right? And I just think that there's enough place in everybody's heart for everybody, whether you like them or not. Like, I just think that's the way it should be. Like, we're all here together, and we need to walk this path together. And it's a journey, not a destiny. So why are we destroying each other on it? Like, I just don't get it.
So the next question that I wanted to sort of touch on, Alberta is a very, I can only imagine, confusing or interesting, depending on what kind of words you want to use, place to be a member of the LGBTQ2S+ community right now. So on one hand, we have a provincial government that has earned us the distinction of being the only province in Canadian history to roll back protections for LGBTQ2S+ youth. But on the other hand, we have municipalities across the province stepping up and taking steps to ban things that are incredibly harmful for LGBTQ2S+ youth, like conversion therapy. So to start with, what are your thoughts on the changes to GSA Protections?
Oh, I was so...
And feel free to get angry.
I was so impressed when they first started bringing the GSAs. Simply what we discussed about earlier, having a place to talk and having words to talk about it, and stuff like that. And the GSA gives that bridge for both the gay community and the straight community to come together and talk about these things, right? And our youth brought that about. Like, why do we keep battling our youth when our youth are our future? And if that's what they want to do, why would we take that away? I find that so very frustrating, And, our own little mini Trump. I cannot stand him. He is absolutely the epitome of Trump.
Yeah.
Like,
he definitely uses the populist rhetoric.
Everything he does. He'll say one thing and he does something behind the closed doors. I mean, Bill 1 with the protests. I mean, who does that? Shady people.
How have you seen any sort of impact to the youth that you work with and that you see on a regular basis? Have you seen any sort of impact to what the changes? Has that had any effect on them?
Most of them are going right ahead with it.
Okay.
And I am so proud
That's
of
awesome.
them. I am so proud of them. I just on Friday did an interview with GSA Alta, which is a group that was put together by a young man. And, I think that's phenomenal that they're still trying to. I mean, they are the future, so they're still trying. I
Cool.
think it's great. I don't know about all of them, but this is what I see, that some of them are still trying to get their voices out there and be heard, and we won't be silenced. We're here now, we're loud, and we're proud.
Okay. What's your take on, Calgary's debate around conversion therapy was really a flashpoint, I think, for the entire country in a lot of ways. And while it brought out the best in a lot of people, we certainly saw a lot of the worst, not only in regards to the threats and the fear-mongering and the rhetoric, but in regards to just the prejudice and the misinformation. So I'd like to hear a little bit about what it was like for you watching that unfold and sort of what your read on the situation is and what your reaction is to it now.
Watching it unfold was painful and scary. I am not going to lie. There was a lot of misinformation, and I think when there isn't quite the details that are needed, that fear creeps in again, and the ugly comes out. And to see people's fear in that kind of sense was terrifying. Like, to think that there's people out there that still think that way. concerns me to no end, because who's watching out for the people that are around them? Like, that's what I want to know, and that kind of stuff, right? And the huge misinformation about just what exactly that ban meant. It's almost like the opposing to what I believe thought that meant that any member of my community that was questioning their sexuality couldn't go get help. That's what they made it sound like to me. Like that banning conversion therapy was taking away a much needed tool to my community. And that's just not true. Nobody needs that kind of therapy. It's extreme to no end. And believe you me, that person can find the therapy if it's out there and available to them, what fits them. This trying to force people into certain therapies or trying to force your religious beliefs, heaven forbid I say that, on anyone, is ridiculous. Trying to convert somebody does not happen.
The fundamental, to me, again, as somebody who's outside all of this, the fundamental assumption that seems to be made with the whole conversion therapy argument is that there's something wrong that needs to be fixed.
Yeah.
And I think that's really why it's so fundamentally flawed, is because that's just not true.
Yeah.
There's nothing broken about somebody who is LGBTQ2S+. But one of the illuminating things for me with that whole debacle was how many people still very clearly do believe that.
Yes, like you can zap it back to right. Like,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like rewire something that was miswired. That is not the fact. You know, we are who we are, and how you feel inside is how you feel inside, right? And nobody gets to tell me how I feel inside, right? So people need to start to realize and step back and stop trying to tell other people how to feel inside. Okay? Like, you can share your opinions and stuff, but you can't tell me, no, you're female and you have to feel female and dress female, and that just doesn't exist. It's not, it's a construct that we need to drop, lose it. It's dated, it's irrelevant, it never was relevant. We just used it out of fear then, and if we keep doing it, we're using it out of fear here. And I don't think a lot of people understood that, the term conversion therapy in that bill was profiting from conversion therapy. Like, I don't know if people noticed, it was, you are not allowed to make money from conversion therapy.
Yeah.
So if I myself decided I wanted to go somewhere and get a conversion therapy, I could do that for free.
Yeah.
It's not that I can't do that. It's that somebody can't benefit or force, oh, I thought I saw something, or force somebody into doing something like that. That's the issue. It's like locking people up because they're handicapped. You can't lock people up because they're handicapped. We adjust. We compensate. We make things accessible for each other. That's what we do as a human race. We don't shut people out. We weren't put on this earth to hurt each other. I don't believe that. So,
and I think we've seen that highlighted over the last couple of weeks with the whole resistance to the Black Lives Matter and the systemic racism. There seems to be a segment of people that believes that we're there. We've got it. We're good. It's all figured out. Everything's fine. And unfortunately, that just doesn't fit with reality. But it seems like when you push those people who everything's fine, that's where a lot of the really horrifying stuff seems to come out.
yeah.
Obviously, it's Pride Month.
Yep.
And there's not a whole heck of a lot publicly going on. What's I'd like to hear sort of your take on what this year means for Pride. And it has been certainly challenging in parts of Alberta, the whole conversation about Pride parades, what Pride means now versus what it meant when it started. Does it mean the same thing? Has it evolved? So what's your take on that?
Well, if you were to ask me this question last year, it would be a lot different. It definitely would be a lot different walking into Pride. I think the most important thing to remember is that Pride is, was, and will always be a protest.
Okay.
The celebration is what comes after. The parade is a protest. It was born out of protests from the 1960s at Stonewall, which was started by black trans women, right? So it was born out of that, and a lot of people will call it a riot. It's not. It's a protest. So were Stonewall. They were protests. And that's simply what Pride is. We're protesting that we still are oppressed. We are. We are still oppressed in many ways. So, you know, it is still a protest. So it was always, I think that because of sort of how calm things were sort of before the Trump era and, you know, the kind of going more towards the right again and, you know, kind of going back in history, basically, is what we've been doing, that we were celebrating. It was a celebration. Things were moving forward. They really were. Then they stopped, right? Like I wouldn't say they stopped. They slowed considerably down when all this came about. So now we're faced with all this stuff, this anger and this oppression that has been building, and it's overflowing everywhere, right? And because our protests stem from black trans women, this year our protest means that much to us more. It's a protest. And yeah, it's changed because of COVID. Because quite frankly, and I heard my very own, like I work for Calgary Pride as well, and the head there, like, I'm not going to say their name because
Yep.
that's not, I didn't get their permission or anything, but they had just mentioned that they are not willing to possibly kill a large portion of Calgary right now. So Pride is not canceled. Pride is going to look different this year.
Okay.
So that's the way the community is coming together. You know, we're going to try and figure something out, some sort of parade. Maybe it's going to be, you know, a virtual parade. Like there's going to be different things. So Pride's never canceled, never. The celebration end of it will never go away. But this year, a lot of us have put a lot of energy back into the Black Lives Matter protests because that's where we come from. That's where our rights come from.
Given the tone that's been set by certainly our provincial government,
Yes.
do you think that the tone of Pride will change more from what we've seen over the 2 years ago, 3 years ago, where it was much more of the celebratory piece back to a little bit more of a protest piece?
I think it's going to be scarier. So yeah, if protests are what are needed for whatever happens, we will. We're prepared to stand up for our rights. But yeah, we do want to keep it still a celebration because we do want to celebrate our lives. We have a long way to go as far as in the grand community, but we do want to celebrate that we are here and out and proud. So we're never going to go away, but if we have to protest, we will.
Okay.
We will.
The last question that I wanted to ask you, for given the vitriol that we saw publicly, and I mean, the outcome obviously was a good one with the City of Calgary, but given the vitriol that we saw publicly, given the fact that we do have a provincial government that for the month of Pride put the flag up for a whole 18 hours.
Yeah. Unreal.
What would you say to a member of the LGBTQ2S plus youth who is watching all of this going on? What would you want them to hear more than anything else?
That they're not alone. Definitely reach out to organizations. There's so many of them out there, you know, like Skipping Stones and Calgary Pride and GSAs, to reach out to those things. Fear is natural. We face a lot of fear in our lives, but I challenge them to do what makes them feel comfortable and really chase that. So reaching out to these organizations and getting involved. There's volunteer work. There's all sorts of things you can do to be a part of the community that makes it less scary, and that you can see that there is a greater whole community that you can connect with, you know, and you might not see that in your everyday life. So to have that option to you is amazing. So I encourage the youth to reach out and to be a part of and do what they're doing. Our youth make great change, and I encourage them to keep doing that and staying strong.
Okay. Now, with that said, you mentioned earlier that you do I think you called it a show, forgive me if I'm using the wrong term, where you answer questions.
I do.
So if for anybody who's watched or heard this segment here, and they are either LGBTQ youth and they have some questions, or they're a straight white male, and they maybe want to learn a little bit more, where would they find that show of yours?
I do that on Facebook, usually live. It'll be starting up again in July, and it's usually later at night. The kids that I engage with, they message me, and then we do like a Zoom room, and we'll have a chat like that. I'll give you my business card after this too. Like, I'm totally open to speaking with people and creating just a safe space for people to have a conversation. I don't even have to say anything, because I am just amazed with how much the youth are doing, but to give them a place to do it sometimes is what it is. And then as far as the males go, like, social media, ask questions politely. Don't put your biases in the question. Just ask what you want to know, and don't give your opinion.
Okay.
We're not looking for opinions. And
there's certainly, when we talk about social media, there is a segment that is very, very quick to judge anyone who has questions. What would you say to those people who want to ask the questions, and when they do, they get confronted with somebody who is angry because they don't already know the answer?
Ask somebody else. Seriously, because that happens. It happens in everyday life. I mean, not everybody's going to be receptive to you. Don't give up. If you want to know something, educate yourself. That's your stuff to learn, right? So I say don't give up. Don't fight people. Fighting gets you nowhere. If you want to say your point and it doesn't sink in, leave it at that, right?
Awesome.
More love is what I'm trying to say.
Perfect. Thank you so much for being willing to come in and sit down with us and have this conversation, because I think it's a really important one that a lot more people need to be a part of. So thank you again.
Absolutely. Can I add one more thing?
Yeah, absolutely.
Really quickly.
By all
I'd
means.
just like to say, a lot of people have a misconception about drag. I am a drag performer. They say, how can you do that in front of children? I know enough in my life to know what I can perform in front of children and what I can't perform in front of children. So what I'd say to you people who are fearful about taking a child to a drag show is, if it's a drag show for all ages, it's geared towards all ages. You're not going to have a sexualized show. So please don't think that all drag shows are sexualized. If you're going to a nightclub to see a drag show, odds are it's going to be pretty highly sexualized. But if you're going to a library to see a drag show, or a park, more than likely you'll be safe and be fine.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense to me. I'm also I'm a musician, and I have certainly done shows in farmers markets and stuff like that, where I have been very selective about what of my original material I perform. So there's really no difference between a musician performing for a public audience where there's kids versus a drag king or queen or a monarch performing.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you again so much.
Thank you.
As always, if you appreciate the kind of content that we produce here at The Breakdown, please consider signing up as one of our Patreon supporters at patreon.com/thebreakdownab. Even a small pledge of $5 a month helps us to keep producing the kind of content that we do and get to the places where these stories take place. Also, if you're inclined, please rate and review our podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, as every rating helps us reach more people. Thank you again for your time and for your attention. My name is Nate Pike, and this has been another episode of The Breakdown.